Sarah Lennon, what a delight to have you in this very special week for both of us. You were my first podcast guest three years ago. You're already 1 year into your business. I can safely say, and I have tingles as I say it, you have been a huge support and advocate for me. And I don't think either of us would be here without one another. I'm sure both of us would say that. Um, the time was right. We both are holding so much that we want to share with the rest of the world. And I couldn't be so happier to have you in this moment. So very, very warm welcome back to Beyond the Norm podcast.
Thank you. What a welcome, Norma. Absolutely, yeah. And I think it is a huge week for both of us, and I really do. I value this time. So huge thanks to you for making the time for this and for having me on. I'm really excited to get stuck into this.
Super. I want you to introduce yourself in the context of what I suppose we're going to speak on. But also, yeah, where you've come from, because a massive congratulations to you. Your business is 4 years old this week. Your fourth child, or some would say your third child, and then you had your fourth or fifth, actually, in other ways. So huge congratulations to you. There is loads of people who don't know you, so I would love for you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Sarah Lennon. I run a business called Story Coach, and it is a facilitation and career change consultancy. So there's three main strands to it. One is I support individuals and teams to create bold new chapters. So this is through for individuals, career change, coaching and strategy. For teams, it's looking at workshops, creating them around reconnection, around ways of working, areas like resilience, psychological safety. And then I also work in the parental support space. So this is where I focus on creating mental load workshops for teams and for different groups as well, and also then return to work supports as well. So I am a mother myself. I have 3 kids and I have a partner, my husband. And I have a really core belief that in order for us to have equality, or more importantly, equity at work, it has to begin at home. So this is why I suppose the center point of what we're going to focus on throughout our conversation today, but also why I do this part of the work that I do.
Super. And I suppose getting the truest sense I know about you and how you and I complement each other. We talk about mother, not mother, and how many of us are mothers, but you are a mother in the truest sense. And I am not. Let's acknowledge that. But I know I have a felt sense of the topic of mental load. Can we start with what's your lived in experience of this, and even before becoming a mother? Because I put you in the context of a modern feminist, I would say, always advocating for women in particular, or for people who are in caring mode. So share a little bit about your lived in experience, even I suppose we'll start with prior to becoming a mother, and then in the context of today as a mother.
Mm. So I think I would say that I grew up in a fairly equal household. So I have 2 brothers. Both my parents worked when I was growing up as well, which was it was I probably am just at the cusp of that generation when it started to become more normal. And for me, I think the mental load probably wasn't even a topic that I would have considered prior to having kids a huge amount. I think the idea of, although I saw in my household, say, um, it's only upon, I suppose, hindsight and reflection that you get to see where it actually was infringing on different areas. But for us, we had two present parents. My dad worked a lot more than my mom, and my mom had to manage three kids um, a good bit on her own when we were young as well. So she definitely had to deal with a lot of it. And I think I've had many conversations with her over the years um, around this area, because I think it's one that it's like essentially described time and time again as the invisible load. And although the topic itself is becoming more spoken about now, thankfully, it perhaps wasn't always that way. So for me, my lived experience was probably being very unconscious to it. I didn't realize how much was involved and how much was going on in the background, um, until I started to, yes, have kids myself, but also then started to work a lot with different women, primarily in the coaching practice that I work in. So I got to see it come through time and time again as a theme in coaching, which that was what instigated my interest in it, as well as say working in the tech corporate world. You get to see certain things happening at a particular point in people's careers as well, or a particular age demographic. So for me, that's where I come to it from, is really not knowing, and then becoming aware, and then educating myself further on it, because for me it's incredibly important.
You've talked about a journey there, really, of the not knowing to knowing to educating. And you and I share so much in common, but we both have a real thirst for learning. And especially we don't learn always the same things. Sometimes they collide, sometimes they don't. And one of the things is when we really have energy around a topic, that there's a real thirst for the knowledge, because you didn't know to knowing, and there's like an awakening nearly in oh my
Yeah.
God, I didn't realize that. Um, and I'm putting you in a personal position, but the ages of your children are important here, the stage in the life that you're at. So just,
Yeah.
and you share it as you would wish, but yeah, the ages of your children as they are today.
Yeah. So I have two girls and a boy. My oldest daughter is 9. My middle daughter is 5.5, which is very important. And my youngest little man, he is 20 months. So just over the 1.5 cusp into the fun time of toddler years. So I'm right in the throes of the busy, intense, from one perspective, intense
Yeah,
side
the
of it.
juggle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for people to, I suppose, build that credible trust in your own load and your own and balance right now. Um, for those who are unfamiliar with the term mental load, or the second shift, I've heard you refer to it as well. Can you give some wording around it just to help people get a sense of it? So we're bringing them into some possibly people into the not knowing into the knowing phase. How would you articulate that?
Yeah. So essentially, the mental load is a description of three categories, right? So, on one category is the cognitive labor that's involved in managing a household and a family. So, this is where you talk about, say, meal planning, play dates, activities, shopping, things like that, the practical elements to running a household. And the other side is the emotional labor. So, this is where essentially where you're managing the emotions of your family or of the household as well. So, say you have a child settling into creche, you say you have a kid acting up in school, say something's going on with one of your kids, it's managing those emotions, or with your partner in the household as well. And the mental load essentially depicts the intersection of those two categories, those overlapping categories. So, what it does is the mental load covers the practical elements and the emotional elements, emotional labor in managing and running a household and a family. That's where the mental load comes in.
That is so helpful for me even, and I've learned so much because of you, but um that some people's mental load could be, in a partnership, they feel really heavy on the emotional load, but the other partner does a lot of the practical.
Yeah.
And I definitely know examples of that in my families and my parent, friends groups, and also my own lived in experience. And I suppose to balance that, I will represent the single side of
Yeah.
the coin here. And when Sarah spoke about this, I went, oh my God, okay, my lived in sense of this was, and I will say in a past tense, I don't have it right now, is when my mother was initially sick and then moved into, I suppose, an active dying phase. And I was running two households. So my own, which my own needs are my own. I think people think if you're not single, we still have to wash clothes and we still have to cook and we still have
Yep.
to do all the jobs that a family has to be done for ourselves, which is not selfish, it's just necessary. But I was also doing that at the same time as running my parents' household. Um, and that came with its own challenges because I was parenting my parents. And I'll call that out. Um, Hindsight is a great thing, but I definitely was stepping into that role. And the shopping, the emotional load, the practicalities, the cleaning, the caring for somebody who's really sick. Um, and not time for anything else other than those dual tasks. So losing yourself, who am I in this? Who am I when my role is on a Sunday morning to go and do the family shop, when I'm emotionally afraid and scared my mother's dying? There's so much going on at that same time that I only did that for a very brief period of time. I'm going to acknowledge that 16 months in total, from the time of sickness to the time of death. And let me tell you, and Sarah knows this anyway, for the listeners, I was a shadow of my former self. It was a photograph taken around 5 weeks before my mother died, and I am unrecognizable to who I am today. If you were that person, and this is the question to you, over a period of a lifetime, it could be 5 years, 10 years, whatever, have you seen the impact of that lived in mental load? And I want to use the word scary. What does that look like, feel like, sound like when it's to an extreme?
It's essentially like losing yourself, right? So you become a shadow of who you were, because it's like you're essentially managing everyone else, everyone else's plans, everyone else's, all the practicalities. And regardless of whether it's a family unit or whether it's a partnership or whether it's you're caring for your elderly parents or caring for other relatives, you become a shadow rather than being yourself as well, because you're managing everything else, everyone else's emotions, everyone else's baggage. But like you say there, it's your responsibility to manage yourself, right? In that when you were managing the two households. But when you don't know how to do that, number one, or even have the awareness around what that entails, or prioritization from that side, it can become, one analogy that comes up consistently in coaching sessions would be, you can't see the wood from the trees, you don't even know where to start. And it becomes like that analysis paralysis of overwhelm of choices as well, when you're thinking about how to re-engage or how to re-establish or become more familiar with yourself. So that's what I would see is a shadow is the one word that would come to mind. And that's what I would see consistently, particularly with, say, work, like dual career couples, right? So I would work with, a lot of the time I would specialize, say, working with women, so they could be part of a dual career partnership where both partners in the relationship. And I suppose here, like with the mental load, a lot of the research done is around heterosexual couples, so just to bear that in mind as well. But it's yeah, with dual career couples, like what can happen to the person bearing the mental load in that partnership over the course of time. Um, yeah, it's shadow still coming back to
I even get the sense you're holding back, Sarah.
you. Well, it's like,
Because
no.
it's like I suppose I'm poking a bear to like paint the worst case scenario, and you're being really kind with it.
Mm,
And but this, when you speak, I hear just like more than shadow, like a total darkness. But
mm,
yet, when they come to you, there's some light peering in because they know they need help. They don't know how or why. They mightn't have the label on it. They might have a desire to change their career. There's a propelling action that has started to happen by the time they
yeah,
reach you. That it's like the 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 line in the sand is before that. It's like such a darkness that somebody has said, "Wow, you're not yourself anymore. Who are you now? Who am I now?" Um, Sometimes it takes an additional crisis on top of that to really propel that forward. And I know um, somebody I heard recently speak on grief is such a propeller to change because it takes
mm,
something to end and die for you to go, okay, that's it now. And it doesn't need to be an actual death. Can I could just call that out? It can be the end to something. It could be the last child. And I see it amongst a group of peers about to sit their leaving cert.
mm,
And they're like, okay, who the fuck am I now? Because
yeah,
I don't have to go to the parent teacher meetings, and I don't have to go to, the luncheons for parents who might be coming. So the grief and the ending is the start of a new beginning. So it's like propel that back to that parent in the middle of junior cert cycle, maybe starting secondary school, or from going from creche to Montessori, into all those endings and beginnings where a child starts out of nappies. Like each has an ending and a new beginning. That there's
yeah,
this Viktor Frankl's thing, like space in between to go, okay, who am I now? Who am I becoming
yeah,
now? And a chance to pause and reflect. And the sad part of the reality, this area you and I know, is society is like, next, next, next. No
yeah,
time for pausing. It's like,
yeah,
when you get married, when are you having the children? And after the first child,
yeah,
when you have the second child, when you have the third child, it's
yeah,
this societal need for what the fuck is next, as opposed to who am I in the now before the next? So it feels like you have that liberty of meeting people as the chink of light just comes in,
mm,
um, even though they don't know why or how, and they've shown up in your virtual room. Um, yeah, I'll pause there for you to
mm.
share your thoughts on what I've said there.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think I would add on to that as well. It can be with some of the teams and the groups that I've run and these workshops around this topic of the mental load. It's for similar but different reasons, so sometimes they're focusing on um how can they retain people within their team, within the workforce. How can they practice well-being in its truest sense, not just the kind of top level stuff,
Tick the
but
box.
really dig into,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, really dig into, okay, what does this look like? And this is where ways of working comes in from that side with a team as well. But I do think, when working with people one to one, say from a coaching capacity or in that side of it, it's a privilege to be able to support people through navigating those waters, because like you said there can tend to be like a pivotal point or some sort of event, and whether it is grief, whether it is something else that has come to an end, that has begun, whether it's a identity shift or change because of a new baby, or like everything comes into it. They're all pivot points, but I think it's acknowledging that does play a part for you, and really coming back to almost getting to know yourself again is part of that process as well. But it
Mm,
works with both sides, because
yeah.
we're not separate selves. We're not like Norma and work and then Norma at home. You are who you are, and that's something that I think we're becoming more aware of from a societal perspective, but a bit of a way to go.
And that's I suppose, the stance that I have in my work is we start as whole. We might feel fragmented, and how do we bring all those parts of ourselves and aspects of ourselves and love and accept ourselves as the messy whole, or and that sense of the bigger picture. I had asked the question around the impact on the individual, and because you have that beautiful dual aspect to your work, and you started to talk about it there, what's the impact to businesses if 80% of their employees are made up of people who have the predominant mental load in their other systems? Um, what is the impact, and any data or anything you have to offer around that, because you have such wisdom.
Yeah, not like there's a huge amount of work being done and have that's already been being complete in this area. Like, and say there's an Irish organization that released a stat last year that 85% of women will leave full-time work within 3 years of having their first child. And you've got the other side of it is that another stat, the same organization, they ran a survey, and 95% of working parents felt overwhelmed in the past month. 95%, so this idea
That's
of
that's far, like, I don't know, who are the 5%? Who are those 5%, Sarah?
I would like to know that
What's
too.
going on? Yeah, yeah.
But it
That is
yeah,
huge. That's stark.
yeah. And so to think that, say, those stats don't affect business performance, business productivity, or team cohesion, team connection, is it just it is completely remiss, right? Because it absolutely affects it absolutely affects how a team works, but on which then has that ripple effect of impacting on a business. So I think it's the there's I could shout out stats till the cows come home around the mental load, and what, like, say, there's great surveys done by Deloitte Women at Work, McKinsey's and Women in the Workplace report really hones in on that broken rung. But these are, when it comes to the mental load, like, there's a great European centric study that's around the European quality of life, and it was run across 37,000 people across Europe. And what they found was that, like, say, in Ireland, I'll use an Irish specific stat because it's always nice to get them when they're local as well, is like women would tend to do 20 hours of housework a week versus 7 hours a week per men. Right? And the male average is lower than our European counterparts as well. So it's and that I found, that whole survey, or that piece of research, came out of a book that was written by an excellent Irish author called Paula Fiennes. She wrote a book called The Invisible Job, which hones in on this mental load. And I think it's that, to be able to create that connection for businesses to see that when people are impacted by the mental load at home, that it absolutely impacts their own interactions at work, and their performance and everything from that side as well. So it's, if we can create that bridge there of understanding, of driving awareness, but also seeing that there's no one size fits all. Okay, so let's, from that
Yeah.
side too. But it's the only way that change will come is to acknowledge and be aware of it first. So
Mm. Yeah, the truest form of two coaches talking to each other. We're already moving forward. I had this scenario play out in my head, and you jump in where it feels appropriate. And I'm going to call it out. When you said one of the stats there, I can hear a listener shouting at the podcast, going, "No shit, Sherlock! It's the women versus the men." But it's not always true, right? And we're gonna, it's the balance there. But I had this. I saw this woman, and there's no name or anyone in particular. I just like the sense of this woman showing up to work. She's had a crazy morning, getting kids out to school, getting out to creche, thinking of lunches. Maybe one child is not feeling emotionally secure to go to work. There, she arrives into a meeting, and the company themselves have an unfair balance of exchange. That's what I'm going to call it out as. And they are very demanding of that same woman. Um, and there is a volunteering session coming up that week, and there's also a night out next week. And that same woman could have elderly parents that she checks in on the shopping. And the manager who has less of a mental load, in my stereotypical brain, is played out as a male manager who is wondering why productivity is down in the last 2 weeks. Maybe a child was out sick last week, and why can't they attend the volunteering, or why can't they come to the night out, the following week? And that sense of, you're not part of this team, you don't take this team seriously. Do you care about your job when that job is such a light when it's light, but with such another demand onto the person, but also the lack of clarity or understanding from the manager of what that person is holding. Um, and that's a scenario, I've come across it in my client work as well. And the impact to the business and the individual, it's both. Um, but the frustration for the two individuals in that story are really intense frustrations, and turns into anger, and you don't understand me and I don't understand you. It's on both sides, you know. So that was something, as you were telling that, I had that picture of that woman carrying so much, and that, like, when the fuck is this going to end? Like, well, like, what can I do about this? Where can I seek help? How can I rebalance everything here? Um, so yeah, that was the picture you created in my mind when you spoke.
So clearly, vividly, I can see it. But what I would say, like, is that, um there's another author who focuses in on the mental load, Eve Rodsky. She's based in the US, and her book's called Fair Play. And she has this question, which I think is really pertinent right now: is it an ambition gap, or is it an exhaustion gap? When we think about, when we're talking about, like, retaining and elevating female participation in the workforce at senior and C-level, and going up positions as well. And I think that's the piece here. But the other side, and I completely get about the scenario that you've just played through, but the other side of it is, like, it's stereotypes come into play here as well when it comes from the
Massive.
male side. Yeah, so, like, you've got people like, we're people from a cartoon perspective that you're constantly seeing in the media. So, like, I've used an example on my LinkedIn recently around Homer Simpson, or that Peter from Family Guy, or even Daddy Pig from Peppa Pig. I'm still in all of these phases with my kids. And like, I was male role models, so, kind of lazy, incompetent people who need to be almost shown what to do, when in reality, for the majority of dads, that's just not the case. There's onesies out there that say head goes here, arm here, leg here, and nobody needs that, because all it does is it's pushing on that stereotype that men aren't capable when they are perfectly capable. Like, and a good cartoon that's demonstrating that the opposite is Bluey, which is like it's an Australian based cartoon, and the dad his name's Bandit. He's really involved with his kids, and he would be, like, seen within the show, or he's depicted as the primary carer, so he's there, and he would, I wouldn't say, like, they seem to have quite a strong partnership between him and his dog wife, but he's definitely a very present father, and it's just a really good. This is what we need more of as well, because I think we have to be, when navigating through these types of waters, where it is like the mental load is a tempestuous topic. Sometimes it gets people's back up, because they're like, well, if I do it, I always do it wrong, or it's like, if you tell me what to do, I can do it, or it's, and that aspect of, it's called the invisible load for a reason, because sometimes people don't even see what's there to do, unless you bring attention to it. So I think we need to be, like, this is where that growth mindset comes in, about having those conversations and being willing to see that perhaps the way we have been doing things isn't working for everyone, and how can we change that as well, and not come into it with, like, that defensive backup approach, but rather think
Mm-hmm.
about it from the other side of the coin. Okay, is anything that they said there true, and really think about it from that side, because the stereotypes play into this too. And I
Massive.
think it's, Yeah,
assumptions,
it's really,
will always make an ass out of me and you, and
yeah.
um, and that's what this conversation is certainly not. That it's not adding fuel to a fire. If anything, it's like the balance of fire and water in general,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's somewhere in between because there is power in the acknowledgement. But I get that sense of the person would share if they felt safe to do so. And you talk about psychological safety as another area that you work on.
Mm.
Um, that a fear of speaking up, that they're making the invisible visible, needs to be in a safe space.
Yeah.
Um, or else a cost. There's a cost in showing up as visible. Um, and yeah, I suppose I'd love to see and getting into that now, into that real true coaching, the impact of your work when the invisible becomes visible, um, whether it's in those group sessions that you do or over time with a one-to-one.
Mm.
What happens? What's the first phase? And there's lots of, I'm sure, different phases. You often speak as well about the messy middle as well. That's
Yeah.
definitely an area that you talk about. So yeah, talk us through that, Sarah.
I think like the first port of call with this is around the awareness piece. So it's that you actually used a good when you were talking through your what you pictured there around the analogy of a team. So often we use teams for business and for sport, but we don't for home. When in reality, in order for a household, so whatever household you're set up in, to work cohesively, that mentality of thinking as a team, there is no I, but we work collectively together. And that's really a fundamental point of looking at the mental load. So everyone plays their part. So to go back to what you said, when the manager had that kind of misalignment with his expectations versus the employees, what performance, what was going on there, um it's when everyone plays their part in a team, things work. And when people start to
A healthy
drop
balance of
off.
exchange. I heard there's and my stance of systemic work, it's like that the system, when it's in a teamwork mode, it's a shared mode. There's balance of exchange, there's balance of responsibility. Um, and we all can't be at our best all the time. So somebody needs to, when we're lower, that there's somebody there to rebalance us and vice versa, that there's always that dynamic and that can change every hour, every day. Um, and an allowance in a team, not everyone's going to have their best performance every day, but
Yeah.
somebody will shine on a given day and somebody else won't. So how do you create those environments if the other person doesn't see it as that? Or yeah.
Yeah, but this is where like Brene Brown actually uses a great example of um like levels that she talks about with her husband. So she might come in after a hard day and she'll say to him, I'm at a 30. Where are you at today? And he's like, oh, I'm at a 60, so I can cover for you when it comes to, the load piece. They don't mention the load, I will say that, but like this is what kind of alluding to. And then other days, it's she could be at 70 and he's at 20, so she covers him. So really, in a partnership, it's about what's fair and not what's equal. And that's kind of like sometimes what it's a shared view of what is fair for you. So for what might work for my partnership might not work for someone else's, and vice versa. So it's what's fair is not always equal, and what's equal is not always fair. So it's not about being a 50-50 split. And I think that's something that we kind of have hatched onto in a way from societal, like we need to be equal. And it's not about that. It's about like knowing that one size doesn't fit all and coming in with that fairness, that balance there. But it's balance that you choose, that you create. And if someone, it's like with having those the conversation, or even addressing and trying to introduce that topic into your relationship, it's, I would say it takes three things, right? Courage, communication, and clarity. And you need to be really mindful of time. and tact, right? So the time to do it is not when you're all trying to get out the door in the morning and you're late for crash and someone's forgotten their ukulele for school and all, and you're like, well, this is what I'm talking. That's not, that nobody's going to win in that exchange there. And it's not about that, but it's looking at for, so thinking about when is a time where you're both, if you're in a partnership where you're both in that place. So it could be an evening time when everyone's in bed and you have an hour or two to sit down and say, listen, here's what I've noticed. And it's really like having the tact around it. So whatever side that you're on in terms of within the relationship, it's really about preparing for that conversation. And actually, Paula Fiennes has an invisible job description on her website, which is really worth taking a look at if you are looking at this area of the mental load, because it goes through all of the tasks or everything that's covered within. And it's not saying that you need to like list out all 5 pages out of it, but it's rather to look at, okay, what's really important to me to get out of this, where it's going to be an equal exchange or a fair exchange of what I'm looking for from a kind of rebalancing that mental load, and not necessarily thinking that by tomorrow that it's going to be in that perfect place either, but by starting that process, creating the awareness of what it is, of what's involved in it, that's, you're starting from the best point there and then moving forward with it.
And I get that real sense of, fairness versus equality. That's really, really strong. My curiosity went to a place around single parents or parents that are separating, divorced, where they're not cohabiting, but they're sharing the parent load. Give us the three things again, because I think they're important, because it feels like they're still really relevant. Communication,
Courage,
courage, communication, and clarity. Yeah.
clarity.
Anything that you would add to that in particular for parents that are co-parenting but not living together, and also maybe parents who, not by choice, are totally single, or they find themselves in that scenario?
The co-parenting, like this is like the co-parenting, I think reminds me of that, or what comes to mind is that Stephen Covey principle of like begin with the end in mind. So thinking about what it is, and it's not easy territory to navigate, from a relationship standpoint. So what is it that you want? What experience do you want to have? Do you want your kids to have? And then looking at, that the non-negotiable piece as well. But I think for solo parents or for single parents, like the hidden heroes, absolutely, the mental load is it's I think from that side, it's really about prioritizing what is really important and what's not necessary in different cycles as well. Like, so it's a little bit, if you don't have someone or a cohort to share that load with, and you're taking it all on yourself, it comes back to what you actually said at the beginning of this conversation, which is around where taking care of your sense of self, taking care of what do you need to do to make sure that you balance
Don't
the
get
load with
lost.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's an internal balancing, and it's we all need help, guidance, and other people to be useful to us in those
Mm.
scenarios. And I think that was one facet where I totally lost myself, and I was the queen of self-care prior to that. But
Yeah.
because it was an emergency situation, it was it was a matter of life and death, and that it felt all my values and my philosophies went out the window because I didn't know how long it would go on for. Um, and certainly, Sarah and I also share. I've managed to get Sarah into ice baths, and she knows how, finding the Wim Hof, that was the start of me returning to self.
Mm.
And it's obviously, I'm not in the ice every day. I am going for a swim after this session. That the sea has always been a place where I feel held. I get a sense of self, and my thoughts merge with my feelings, because sometimes they're very separate things, and like they have that chance to kind of come together, and I feel whole in that. But it's everyone finding their own thing, when whether they're on their own as a carer, where there is, and I also get that sense of the office manager that cares so deeply for their their children workers, that,
Yeah.
like, that sense of that, that person that really keeps everyone together.
Mhm.
And the moment they retire, that they don't know who they are, their identity has always been caring for the other. Because I feel there's a huge topic around that, and the mental load around those individuals in workplaces that are the
Yeah.
turnkey to everything, but they and some cases it's a very conscious thing, and that's what they want, being in service of the other. And you and I understand that from the nature of our work, but how to attend to ourselves in those moments where the balance is flipped and it becomes subconscious, that our way of being is always rescue, and our way of being is always helping, whether that's through practical or emotional territories. That something around, if you're aware of it and it's a conscious decision, that there's limitations, but if you feel boundless energy, knock yourself out. It's like, it's go where the energy is, and which I often speak about. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that, because I think it's the right now in particular, say for HR teams, if you have been through like the the world of work right now in terms of turbulence, etc. And for HR teams, a lot of the mental load would weigh on them.
Mm.
They're dealing with not only say potential layoffs from that side, but also, internally things that it could be going on from an employee experience or well-being side of it as well. And it's very much, there's a huge weight from that side as well. So it's
Mm.
you're right, is in, that can be, whether it's spoken or unspoken, it can be part of people's roles, but it's looking at then, okay, so being aware of that, and consciously saying, okay, so what are the tools or practices that I'm going to incorporate that's going to enable me then um to, like, if you're carrying the mental load at home and then you're coming into work and you're also carrying it there, that's a lot of load
Mm.
on your shoulders, right? So it's being aware, and looking at what can you do, and not in a like, not in a very um a basic way, but it's really integral to think about, okay, what makes me, like, what makes me well, or what is well-being to me, and doing those things and making sure that, as much as is possible, they are non-negotiables within your life.
Amazing. What is well-being? It's, yeah, such a powerful question.
Mm.
I have a last question for you, um, that is very particular to you. So I want to give space for anything else on this topic before we move into that last question. What else would you like to share?
Oh, what else would I like to share? I think it's for me, right. The mental load is a huge area of focus for 2024, because I think I have a real passion for creating an equitable workforce, and this underpins it. So this is where I plan to spend and share and shout a lot more around this area. So if you are interested in it, and if you want to learn more and have a conversation, or if you want to just learn more about it, I'm happy to share any and all resources. But also, follow me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on
We'll share
um,
all your handles on this
my
episode, so we'll
website.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll cover them off.
Yeah.
My question is a future statement,
Okay.
and it is Sarah Lennon in 3 years, because now that we're 3 years fast forward to our first conversation, and we're sitting down again, and we're honoring our fabulous friendship. And I'd say one thing that has always kept our friendship alive is that we both admire each other greatly. Um, and it's 3 years down the line, your children a little bit older, your business, your fourth baby is also growing up. Where are you now, and what has been the impact of your work?
Oh, Norma. Where am I now? I really believe in the work that I'm doing right now and in the work, and I feel like I'm only on the cusp of growing it and not in a scale it to be a hustler type of way, but in a scale it for impact in that way. So for me, it would still revolve around story coach and spreading the awareness and um I probably should have like a solid stat that I'd like to reach in terms of like by meet with 50 organizations
It's
or
a felt
etc.
sense. I think it's more a
Yeah,
felt sense. Yeah.
yeah, but I feel like it's I think what would be success from that side for me would be that these are topics that are not kind of sneered on or just kind of let go, that they're really embraced as part of our whole work life integration and the way we bring ourselves to work every day. So that's what I would see in 3 years, and still doing a mix or that blend for me of the workshop facilitations or the workshops that I currently facilitate, and then also doing that one-to-one coaching work, because I think it took me a while, but I got to a place last year where I was like, yeah, this is a good blend. So yeah, I'm obviously still in touch and engaging with you. That just comes as natural.
Sarah and I have an ambition that we will work together, and we're now putting that out there to the universe because I feel we complement each other beautifully from so many different perspectives. We are each other's yin and yang and yin, depending on who needs it of a given day. Sarah, I have one thing to say. I hope your dreams do not come true because they're too small.
Thank you.
Because I think the profound impact of your work, I have a feeling that this can go much bigger, and the impact of your words and your wisdom and your lived in experience, and your children's lived in experience of being in a household where there's equity, and what those three children will go on to do. Um, I think you are, as you said, you're only touching it now. So you can't even get a sense of it. But let me tell you, I get a sense of you. And it's a bigger stage than and way bigger arena than where you're playing in now. And you'll know this for those who follow Sarah on LinkedIn. When she writes, her words go viral. Um, and she doesn't have to say a lot, but when she does, it goes big. What Sarah also hasn't said is she started a Substack email channel.
Yes.
Please follow. Her words are fabulous and they really land and resonate with so many. Sarah holds such a resonance for people who can't articulate what they're feeling. So I'd really encourage you to support her in whatever way that means to you, a like, a follow, a share. And if you're called to speak to her, please. Her openness and her warmth is a joy to be around, and as such, I'm nearly going to get emotional. Um, Such a great friend, and Sarah's always been a part of my story of becoming a coach. Um, and I don't know what time of year it was when we sat down for that first coffee, but I have a feeling it might be this time of year. It certainly was a springtime, I think. And it culminated me ended up becoming a trained coach. I probably had a natural sense of being a coach by then, but I certainly didn't have the academic. And Sarah was such a turnkey to my story. So I really hope that is for you as well. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. You know what you reminded me though is that when I was writing writing my Substack email yesterday, and I'm 4 years old this week, my business is,
Whoop,
and
whoop.
yeah, but I also realized that I completed my coaching qualification, my first one. I've done a few now, but my first one back in June 2014. So I'm 10 years
Wow.
Coach qualified this year. Yeah, I was pregnant with my first child at the time. So yeah, it's like
Wow.
it's all
There's a
it's all
lot of
coming, all
giving
coming.
births, a lot of
Yeah.
new beginnings, and rightly so that we did this in a special week for us both.
Yeah.
You are officially my 34th episode, and I think my 14th guest as well, so there's power in the numbers.
Yes.
Um, I am starting a new tradition in 2024 where you leave a question for my next guest, something that the Diary of the CEO podcast does, and I love it because it means there's a link to our ending and the beginning. And the next person I'm interviewing is a human design coach, which Sarah and I have a particularly fondness for because we're the same person. Um, what would your question be? And it doesn't need to be on human design, but what would be your question for my next guest?
Mm. If they had 3 lessons to share with your listeners, what would they be and why?
Fabulous. I love it. I look forward to hearing her reply. Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And I will stop the recording there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.